Who's here?
Okay, so welcome to chapter 16. What do we know so far? So far, in a sense, the book is over. The book is done. We know everything we need to know. Why? Because the people came to Rabbi Shneur Zalman and they said, we don't know what's happening with us. We are people that we're trying to become close to Hashem. We're trying to refine ourselves. We're trying to become more spiritual. And yet, after decades, we see that we still have negativity and negative impulses within ourselves. Obviously, we're being unsuccessful, and obviously, everything we're doing is for naught. And that creates tremendous frustration, and that has side effects, depression, etc. Okay, so what is the answer? The answer is really the diagnose. The diagnose is there are two souls, and you have a godly soul that wants to transcend and become close to God, and you have an animal soul that wants to be self-oriented, and there's a battle between the two. So don't get all bent out of shape that you can't get rid of your animal soul. It's impossible. Why not? Because you're a Beinoni, you're an intermediary person. You're not that tzaddik who's created with the capacity to completely transform the animal soul. Okay, we're done. Now I got to diagnose. But it's not enough to get a diagnosis. You also need a solution. So how do I live? So Rabbi Shneur Zalman already gave us a solution. What do you mean, how do you live? We have a solution. Chapter 12 told us the mind controls the heart. A person has the capacity to decide to do something, even if they don't want to do it. How do I know? All the time. I stop at the red light. Why? Because the cop is standing right there. You drive on the highway. So today, everyone has GPS. Everyone has GPS, or GPS and ways you can find the cops. But my wife told me the old way of finding out there's cops. So you're driving on the highway, and all of a sudden, in front of you, all the red lights go on, all the brake lights go on. You know there's a cop because everybody is slowing down. Why are they slowing down? They have to meditate that there's going to be a cop here, and you want to go fast, but the mind tells you to slow down. No, it's automatic. Right? It's automatic. The mind tells you this is a bad idea. You stop instantaneously, even though a second ago you were so excited about driving fast. So that's a natural thing. The natural thing, the mind controls the heart. Simple. That's all. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman sent us on our way, and we solved all the problems. We have the battle. We have the two souls. We have the capacity to control our thought, speech, and action. The garments. We can't control what emotion falls into our hearts or rises to our consciousness, but we could decide if we want to engage in that emotion, engage in that thought, engage in that speech, and everything is fine. And we go home and the Tanya is done, really, in some sense. But that's only chapter 15. Now we have all the way to chapter 53. So what's going on? So now we get to the tricky business. Not the tricky business. We're getting to what Karina spoke about earlier in chapter 12. It's not enough, robot. You can't just do the right thing of self-control. Right? If Rabbi Shneur Zalman shut the book now, if the book is over now, it's still very enlightening because I know about myself. I know what's happening. I got an X-ray of my inner soul. So that's worth a lot of money. That's very powerful. So I understand what's happening within me. So on that level, it's unbelievable. But on the other hand, on the practical level, all you're telling me is self-control. And you can exert self-control over your thought, speech, and action. Question is, it's not enough because what is going to motivate me to self-control? Yes, at this moment, I could decide to do the right thing. But if for the rest of my life, for the next many decades, I'm going to have to exert self-control every moment, I'm going to snap, or I may snap. Right? If you ever tried to diet, you know, it's easy to do it for the first 2 days, actually hard. The bottom line is it's easy to do it in the beginning, but every time is a struggle. And ultimately, it's very hard to keep this on going in the long run for a long time. So in the immediate, at this moment, can I control myself? Yes. But could I control myself for the next 100 years? That's much harder. So this is what we already said in chapter 12. And Karina addressed that. And she said, look, the Alter Rebbe says that when you pray, the Beinoni is able to awaken emotion in his heart to God. So it's not just self-control. It's not just his animal soul is pulling him to do things that are destructive and negative, but he has self-control. It's not just self-control because he always also has motivation fueling the self-control. I want to do what's right. Why? Because I love God. Why do I love God? Because my godly soul loves God. Okay. And by prayer, I awaken that love. Fine. And that's good. That's beautiful. Problem is that's easier said than done. And that's why we have essentially what's happening now for the next many chapters is going to be to explain how do I awaken the love to God within the heart of the Beinoni. And we're going to have a little bit over here now, chapter 16, 17, all the way to chapter 25. There's going to be two paths which we're going to discuss. And After that, we move to other issues. We talk about the ideas of joy, how to cultivate joy, 9 chapters on joy. And then we talk about the superiority of action, because that's tied into the Beinani's life, as we'll discuss then. And then later in the 40s, we talk about, once again, emotions. But emotion is a very important part of the book. It's an important part of the book for 2 reasons. The first reason, which I told you, because otherwise, if it's just self-control, it's very easy, very difficult to maintain. And the other reason, it's also because, remember, go back to the original cover page of the book, which really got us to buy the book, right? Because you look at the cover. How do I know if I should buy the page? There's no reviews, right? I look at the cover page. If it sounds good, I want to buy it. What did Rabbi Shneur Zalman said he's going to do in that book? He said he's going to teach us, quotes the verse from the Torah, Ki karov elecha, it's very close to you to serve God in your mouth, in your heart, and in your action. Okay, mouth and action, I understand, is relatively easy. But we bought the book because we want to understand what Moshe said, that to serve God with your heart is close, is easy, is accessible. That was like, really? Like Rabbi Shneur Zalman is going to ask in chapter 12, in chapter 17, next chapter, he says, seemingly it's not so easy. It's not so easy to love God, to turn our heart away from the love for negativity and turn it to the love of God. But that's the pitch. Moshe said it, so we have to explain it. So what we're trying to do now is explain how the Beinani could create a love to God in his heart. And basically, the big picture is that there's 2 levels of love. One love, and we alluded to it last week, one love that you create through intellectual meditation, which is the subject of this week. And the next this week and next week, the next 2 chapters. And then there's a love that is the hidden love that exists within the soul of every Jew, but you awaken it and reveal it through meditation, which is a little bit easier to awaken, but we'll get to that. That takes a few chapters to explain. So let's focus on today. Today we're talking about the love that we create through emotion, through the emotion that we create through intelligence, through intellectual meditation, which is really what Rabbi Shneur Zalman explained at great length in chapter 3, where he explained the 10 sfirot, that there's the mind, the chachma and bina, the mother and father, that produce the emotions, the midot, the emotions which are the children. Okay. Now, just to put it out here, there's a beautiful, how do I say it? There is a path. Rabbi Shneur Zalman says some people can meditate and can awaken passionate love in their heart. Some people cannot. That's not the makeup of their soul. And therefore, they too can awaken a love to God through meditation, but the meditation looks a little bit different. And he gives you those 2 paths. So ultimately, you can't say chapter 16 doesn't apply to me, because it applies to everybody. Either you can be on the higher level, like a person, a more emotionally developed person that could awaken passionate emotions through their heart through meditation. Even if you see that's not working for you, there's also another path of meditation that creates emotion, even though that emotion is not as passionate, as we will discuss. But again, it covers everybody. Everybody's included in chapter 16. There's no way to say it doesn't work for me, because certainly the second half, in other words, the second possibility is accessible to all. What are we trying to do? We're trying to fuel the emotion that will give the Beinani the energy and the capacity and the joy and the enthusiasm to engage in the battle and make the right choice when it comes to the garments. Because it cannot just be self-control. There has to be, I love you, therefore I exert my self-control not to do something against your will. I love you, therefore I exert my self-control to direct my actions in a way that will make you happy. But it's not just self-control. The first line of defense is self-control. But after that, at this moment, I want to do something negative. I have self-control. My mind controls my heart. But after that, in the long term, I have to create an emotion, and that's what we're doing now, and that's what we're going to do in the next couple of chapters. So this is the story in short. This is the introduction. Any comments, please share. Otherwise, we jump right into chapter 16. Assuming I can find it. Okay, chapter 16. Make it bigger so I can see it. Okay. We'll read. This then is an important principle regarding the divine service of the Beinoni. The essential thing is to govern and rule the nature that is in the left part of the heart by means of divine light that illuminates the divine soul abiding in the brain, and to rule the desires of the heart. How do I do that? How do I get my mind to control the heart and to rule over, meaning to change the desires of the heart? This mastery of one's nature and desires is achieved when he meditates in his mind on the greatness of the blessed infinite God, so as to create through his understanding a spirit of knowledge and fear of God in his mind. As we discussed in chapter 3, meditate about the greatness of Hashem. What to meditate about, by the way? That's the second half. That's part 2 of the book. After the first 53 chapters, you have the gate of faith and unity, where Rabbi Shneur Zalman explains what's the chief meditation in the Hasidic philosophy. And he himself was not sure. I think I alluded to it when we spoke about the introduction. He himself was not sure which one to put first, book part 1 or part 2. He ended up putting this part 1. But the bottom line is, we're not getting into what to meditate, but in general, meditate about the greatness of Hashem. And when you meditate about the greatness of Hashem, as we explained in chapter 3, meditation produces emotions. That's the idea of Chabad, Chachma Bina Dat, wisdom, understanding, knowledge produces the emotions. And then you'll have a spirit of knowledge and here he says awe, or awe of God. And later we'll say love. This knowledge and fear will cause them to turn away from the evil condemned by the Torah or by our sages, even from a minor rabbinic prohibition, heaven forbid. So the contemplation creates awe, but the contemplation also creates love. Contemplation on God's greatness will bring about also a love of God, which will reveal itself in the right part of his heart, the seat of the godly soul's emotional faculties, with a longing and desire to cleave to him by fulfilling the precepts of the Torah and of the rabbis and the study of Torah, which is equivalent to them all. What is he saying? He says, you want to have strength to overcome the negativity of the animal soul? Very simple. Meditate. Meditate in the greatness of Hashem. Think about the greatness of Hashem. That's going to produce love and awe. What is the love and awe going to tell you? The love and awe is going to tell you, what do I want? I love God, and therefore I want to cleave to God. How do I cleave to God? I cleave to God by fulfilling the commandments in the Torah and by studying the Torah. Okay, so now everything is fine. If you're that type of person, everything is fine. Now we're going to say, oh, 1 second. What happens if someone tries, he meditates, and it's not going? He cannot create that passion within the heart. Okay, we have advice for him as well. Furthermore, one must know an additional important principle in the Beinoni service of God. It's an additional important principle, but it's really for an additional type of Beinoni. Even if one's intellect and understanding are incapable of producing a revealed love of God in his heart, to make it burn as it ought with fiery flames, with a desire and a longing and a passion manifestly felt in the heart to cleave to God, right? I can't do it. I can't create that passion of love in my heart. He says that's okay too. What happens? So he's going to describe another stage of love, which is sort of in between the mind and the heart. So let's let Rabbi Shneur Zalman discuss it, describe it, and then we'll see if we can understand it. Instead, the love is hidden in his mind and in the recesses of his heart. And here you have a footnote or a side note that discusses the Kabbalistic idea of why people are different. It all depends on which sphera my soul emerges from. The reason for this inhibition is that this person's intellect and nefesh, ruach, and neshama derive from the so-called ibur, conception and concealment within the supernal understanding, and not from the stage of leda, birth, and revelation, as is known to the students of Kabbalah. So we could read it. I think we could skip it right now because it's not so important to what we're trying to get at. But the bottom line is that there's 2 stages within the sphirot. You have where the mind gives birth to emotion. And if my soul emerges from a place where the heart where emerges from the sphera where the emotions have already been given birth to, then it's easy for me to create a passionate emotion in my heart. But if my soul emerges from the place where the intellectual capacities are not yet given, that the emotions have not yet been born, but they are in a state of ibur, a pregnancy, then it's hard for me to create revealed passion in my heart through meditation. Okay. But nevertheless, this person could love God as well. But it's sort of an in-between state. It's almost, I think the best way to describe it would be, it's an appreciation of the mind. So I have the mind tells me something is good. That's abstract. I have my heart pulling me to something. That's an emotion. Then there's an in-between state. The in-between state is that, you know something? I don't feel the love in my heart, but in my mind, I have an intellectual appreciation that tells me, you should love this, you should do this, and you should do this, and that motivates you, and that fuels your action. So I was talking to my father-in-law about this on Sunday, because I went to the Bas Mitzvah and we saw him, and he gave me a metaphor. He said, the metaphor is like this. You have a friend, and the friend is your friend right now, and you love the friend, and you feel the passion. I love the person so much. And they come to town. Of course, you're going to go visit them. Your emotion is pulling you, your heart is pulling you. What happens if right now, I don't love the person, I'm not his friend, but I grew up together. So when we were kids, we were very good friends. So he comes to town. I say, do I feel my heart that I have to go? No. But for the sake, my mind tells me, it's a really good idea to go. And that's a good enough idea to get me into the car to drive an hour and go meet that guy. So do I have the passion in my heart? No, but I have the intellectual appreciation that motivates me to go. Now, when the intellectual idea itself is an abstract concept, it would be nice for me to go. That's too abstract, right? Ideas don't fuel my action. For me to actually go and get into the car and drive and go meet that person, I need to be motivated. And the motivation comes not from the intellectual idea. It either comes from the emotion. I feel emotion in my heart, or I have an intellectual appreciation. So my mind tells me it's a good idea. You should go do it. So it's pushing me. So this is the sort of the in-between stage where we're going to call it emotions as they are still in the realm of the mind. Because again, from the Chabad perspective, from the way that Tanya describes, the mind produces emotion. But in between, the mind is abstract. But the in-between state is the mind tells the heart, this is a good idea. And then it trickles down to the heart, and the heart, a passion is created. If I'm that type of person. If I'm not, then it doesn't trickle down to the heart to create a passion, but my mind motivates me, and my mind tells me, gives me an appreciation and a feeling. It's not really a feeling, but it's a motivation. And he says, this is the right thing to do. Do yourself a favor, go do it. Get in the car, get out of the house, get off the couch, go do it, right? So it's not something that's a passionate emotion in my heart, but the mind appreciates this. And now Rabbi Shneur Zalman is going to give us the meditation that even if I can't feel a burning love to God in my heart, the meditation that will get me to fuel my garments, my thought, speech, and action. So in that sense, it's not the complete love of God, but it's the in-between state, which is enough to create motivation. So let's go back a second. So he says, even if I'm a person, let's go back for a second. Even if one's intellect and understanding are incapable of producing a revealed love of God in his heart, to make it burn as it ought with fiery flames, with a desire and a longing and a passion manifestly felt in the heart to cleave to God. Instead, the love is hidden in his mind and in the recesses of his heart. He explains what that means. This means that the heart comprehends with the spirit of wisdom and understanding in the brain, i.e., instead of being excited with the love of God, as it ought to be, the heart merely experiences an understanding of the greatness of the blessed infinite God before whom all else is not. Right? That's the second half of the Tanya, the second part of Tanya, the second portion. Explains to you how everything is insignificant before the infinity of God, and God is the only thing that is infinite and the only thing that is true, etc., etc. Go read that. Once you read that book, what are you going to understand? For which reason it is fitting and due unto him, blessed be he, that the soul of every living thing should pine for him, to cleave to and become absorbed in his divine lights. It's appropriate. I think about how great God is, and I say it would appropriate for every creation to want nothing other than to connect to God. To connect to the infinity of God or eat cotton candy. It's appropriate that a person should yearn to come to connect to the greatness of God. That's everybody. It is likewise fitting for his own soul, the nefesh and ruach within him, to languish for him with a fervent desire to leave their seed, i.e. the body, which surrounds and conceals that soul like a seed, in order to cleave to him. In other words, what should happen? My soul really, once I meditate about the greatness of Hashem, I have the appreciation that the only thing really worth loving is God. And therefore my soul should feel this yearning. It's fitting for the soul to feel the yearning for God and want to escape the body, as we discussed yesterday in the sons of Aaron. So intensely, his thoughts continue, should his nefesh ruach long for God, that only against their will would they dwell in the body. They are bound to it like deserted wives, literally living widows, who are bound to their husbands and are forbidden to remarry as long as the husbands who left them are alive. That's a metaphor. I don't want to be in this world. I want my soul should want to cleave to God. I'm in the body only against my will. Now, in the present state, their thoughts cannot grasp God at all, except when it grasps and vests itself in the Torah and its commandments. That's what we discussed in chapter 4 and 5, that my soul really wants to cleave to God. But in this body, I can't cleave to God. The only way I can cleave to God is if I cleave to God's garments. What are God's garments? Thought, speech, and action of the Torah. As illustrated previously by the example of one who embraces the king, right? We discussed that in Tanya chapter 5. You embrace the king, even though you're studying Torah, you think you're studying about physical law. That's like you're hugging the king's garments. You say, I'm not hugging the king, I'm only hugging his shirt. Yeah, but he's inside the shirt. So the same thing is with Torah. In other words, what am I thinking about? I think about the greatness of Hashem. I see that it's worthy. It would be appropriate for all of creation to yearn for God, including myself. But I know that in this world, we can't cleave to God. The only way we can cleave to God is through hugging him, through the performance of Torah and mitzvot. All of the above thoughts pass through his mind and heart, and lead him to resolve that it is therefore fitting and proper for them, for his nefesh and ruach, different levels of his soul, to embrace God with all their heart, soul, and might. This means in a practical sense, to fulfill the 613 commandments in act, speech, thought, and thought. The thought being the comprehension and knowledge of the Torah as explained above. Consequently, when the Beinoni ponders this subject in the recesses of his heart and mind's understanding, and his mouth and heart are in accord, in that he fulfills with his mouth the resolve of his mind and heart's understanding, namely, to direct his desire toward God's Torah, meditating on it day and night in oral study, in other words, through speech. We'll see later why the speech is so important. And when his hands and other bodily organs too carry out the commandments, as was resolved in his mind and heart's understanding, then when he implements this resolution, the tevuna, the intellectual emotion, which cannot properly be called love or fear, but tevuna, literally understanding, is clothed in the act, speech, and thought of the Torah and its commandments, providing them with intellectual power, vitality, and wings that enable them to soar on high. The love and fear referred to as tevuna, although not heartfelt emotions, nevertheless serve as wings for one's Torah and mitzvot in the same way as if he practiced them with real fear and love as revealed in his heart. We'll take a break right now for a second, just to summarize and then set up the next part. So far, I think that when I was studying Tanya the first time, my favorite chapter was, of course, chapter 16. Because what does chapter 16 tell you? That you can have a love to God, even if you, by meditation, you try to meditate when you in the greatness of God at 16, and you try to produce passion of love to God. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. What does Tanya chapter 16 tell you? Don't worry. You're a Beinoni. You want emotion. You want to be fueled with the energy to serve God. You can produce, even if you can't produce emotion, you can produce what he calls here. What's the word he uses here? He uses here in the English, not a bad word. He uses, I lost the place. Motivation, yeah, but he referred to that concept. What it was, intellectual emotion, coined a new term. This is not the Rabbi Shneur Zalman. This is the translation of Tanya in English. Intellectual motivation, right? I cannot create. So just an idea is not motivation. I have an idea, abstract idea. It would be good for me to go to space. Okay, that's not motivation. That's an abstract idea. It's not going to get me anywhere. Then I have emotion. I really, really want something. Then I have intellectual motivation. What's intellectual motivation? I think about this and I realize that this is a good idea and it's appropriate for me to want to love God because God is the only thing worth loving. And if you think about it for enough time, even if you cannot produce the emotion in the heart, you can produce the intellectual motivation. And that's a beautiful thing, because it tells you, it's sort of when you talk about creating a passionate love to God, it's almost like it's too difficult. But this is something anyone could do. Anyone could think about the greatness of Hashem and say, ask myself, what do I want and why do I want it? What are my goals in life? What do I want? And then I ask myself, is this appropriate? What's really appropriate for me to want is to connect to the greatness of God. That's the only thing that really matters. And then my mind tells me it is really appropriate for you to really want this. And that becomes fuel that would fuel my decision to cleave to God and hug God through for performing the mitzvot and the Torah. Again, I said this earlier. Some people look at the commandments and say, why do the Jews have so many commandments, 613 commandments? From when you wake up in the morning until you go to sleep at night, every step of the day, the Torah is telling you, do this, don't do that. Enough already. Genug shem, like you say in Yiddish. But the answer is that the Torah is not a rule book. The Torah is opportunities to grasp God. Okay, you look at it this way, it's a love story. How do I connect to God? God is infinite. How do I connect to God? I need to grab God's garments. I need to do something tangible that I can grab God, because in this world, you cannot grab God through understanding. We can never understand God. So you need something tangible. Every mitzvah and every Torah study is an opportunity to hug God and grasp God. So in that sense, that's the expression of the motivation of the mind, intellectual motivation, the way he calls it. Okay, that's enough. That's beautiful. Now we got to deal with the last third of the chapter. The last third of the chapter gets sort of a little bit Kabbalistic, but it's not too difficult to understand. What happens is like this. It says in the Zohar, he alluded to it, we already alluded to it earlier. It says in the Zohar like this, and if a person does a mitzvah and there's no love and awe, it's like a bird that can't soar. So the mitzvah stays in this world and is not elevated to God, doesn't go up to the heavens, whatever that means. We'll discuss that later. What does it mean that the mitzvah has to go up to the heavens? But the Zohar says, you want your mitzvah to go up to the heavens, you have to learn, you have to serve God with love and awe. Love and fear, which are the two wings that allow for the mitzvah to soar. They say a story, I don't know if it's a true story. They say a story, I think I heard it once, that they once went to, there were people who were opposed to the Hasidic movement. And one of the Hasidic leaders walked into their study hall and he says, wow, it's unbelievable. This place is so packed with Torah, I can't even step in. And everyone thought, wow, what a compliment. He never said it when he went to the Hasidic study hall. He only said it when he went to the study hall of those who opposed Hasidim. It was a little strange. Later he left, he said, I'll tell you what I mean. Tell you what I meant. It says in the Zohar that if you don't, your Torah study is not motivated with love and fear of God, so the mitzvahs don't go up. So the Torah study didn't go up, so it's still stuck in the study hall. So I can't get in, there's too much Torah here. You go to the Hasidic study hall, the Torah, there's no Torah here. All the Torah are surged upward to God. That's just a cute story. But the bottom line is here we have a problem. We have a problem is the Beinoni, if you're telling the Beinoni he's not going to have love to God, how is this Torah going to be elevated? As it's important to, we'll see later what the importance of the Torah being elevated, but whatever, that we're getting into that right now. And Rabbi Shneur Zalman is going to say that, don't worry, the sages teach that this intellectual emotion could also serve as wings to raise your Torah. And the idea is like this. The idea is that emotion itself, intelligence itself, an idea in your mind itself cannot raise the mitzvah, which is action. Why not? This is very interesting. Which one is more tangible? What's more tangible, an idea or an emotion? So what's more tangible is an emotion. Why? I have an idea that something is great. There's absolutely no effect in the physical world. If I have an emotion that I love something or I dread something, there is physical ramifications of that. My heartbeat will go up. I'm going to start sweating, right? Because emotion is much more physical than an abstract idea. So therefore, Kabbalah says, the idea that I want to connect to God is not enough to raise the mitzvah, because the mitzvah is an action. So you sort of need a bridge. Emotion is a spiritual energy that's close enough to action to raise the action. But an abstract idea has no effect in the real world. It's not physical enough to enclose itself in the tangible mitzvah to raise the tangible mitzvah. Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, but this in-between stage, the intellectual emotion, the intellectual motivation, God is sort of in between. God considers it and makes it wings. And the Rabbi Shneur Zalman interprets a beautiful teaching of the sages and says, this is what the sages meant. So we'll get to that. So that's the third part. If anybody has questions about what we said up till now, or about what we're going to say, you can raise the question now. Otherwise, we read it inside and we make a dash to the end line of the chapter. Because again, we're just studying to get the tastes. Next time around, we'll go slower. Next time around will be after week 53. We're only at week 16, so at week 17, because we had a week on the introduction. So we have some time. Okay, here we go. Okay, we still have another few lines. I stopped a little too early. Too early. So, in other words, when you create this intellectual motivation in your heart, that will give you energy as if you study the Torah with actual passion. And Rabbi Shneur Zalman continues, in which case he would have performed them with a desire, fervor, and passion that are felt in the heart and soul, thirsting for God due to the flaming love of God in his heart, as explained above. Okay. For it is this tevuna. Tevuna literally means the intellectual motivation. That's the word. Tevuna comes from the word bina, but it's what's born out of bina. It's this intellectual motivation or intellectual appreciation. For it is this tevuna in his mind and in the recesses of his heart that leads him to engage in the Torah and mitzvot, as explained above. Had he not meditated in the tevuna, he would not have occupied himself with them at all, but with the physical deeds alone. Even if he is an studious student by nature, as we discussed in chapter 15, that there are people who naturally want to study. Yeah, but they can study mathematics. They can study sciences. Why are they studying Torah? You need the motivation, and the motivation is the appreciation of the mind. Nevertheless, he naturally loves his body more. Okay. Now we're going to get into the idea that we're going to reinterpret what the sages say. The sages teach that if a person has a good, let's read what the sages say. Our sages of blessed memory hinted at this when they said, the Holy One, bless he, joins a thought to the deed. Literally, machshava tova, a good thought. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God joins it to the deed. Literally, what that means, people always thought what that meant is that if you had an idea to go do a mitzvah, you had the intention to go do a mitzvah, you never did it. Hashem says that's a mitzvah, right? You want to go help somebody cross the street. You see someone needs help crossing the streets. You run outside the door. By the time you got there, the person already crossed the streets. Okay, so you had a good thought. So the sages say a good thought, Hashem combine. Literally, everyone understood it to mean Hashem considers it as if you did the mitzvah, but that's not what the sages say. They say that Hashem joins a good thought to the deed. The simple meaning of this phrase that when one intends to do a mitzvah but is prevented from doing so, God ascribes it to him as though he has actually performed it. But the simple meaning warrants in the expression Torah considers him as though he has actually done it. If that's what the sages meant, if that's all what the sages meant, that if you have a good thought, Hashem considers as if you did it, then the phrase should have been something else. It should have said, Torah considers it as if you did it. It's not what it says. It says, Hashem joins a good thought to the deed. What does it mean you're joining a thought to the deed? The explanation, however, lies in the previously mentioned principle. And again, what Rabbi Shneur Zalman is saying, that a person has motivation of the mind. It's not passion in the heart. Hashem joins it to the deed and makes that motivation to be wings to elevate the Torah and mitzvot, just like if you had wings, which are the awe and love, the passionate awe and love. It is this revealed fear and love of God in his heart that vest themselves in one's performance of the commandments, giving them vitality to soar on high. For the heart is also corporal, like the other organs of the body, which are the instruments of action. That's what I mentioned earlier. The heart, the emotion of the heart is physical. And therefore, it actually changes how you feel. It changes your body. You could sense the changes of the emotion within the physical body. The heart is, however, internal and is the organ source of vitality, but it's still physical. Therefore, because the heart in its corporeality is close to the other organs and also provides their vitality, it can clothe itself in their actions to be their wings elevating them. However, the above mentioned fear and love that are in the intelligence of the brain and the recesses of the heart are of a far higher order than the level of action. The intellectual motivation is too abstract, that much more abstract than action. So it's removed from action. Therefore, they cannot clothe themselves in the performance of the commandments to become their intellectual power and vitality, to elevate them so that they may soar on high. If not for the fact that God joins and unites them together with the action, so that they may serve as its wings. They, the tevuna, fear and love, meaning the intellectual motivation, are called good thoughts, for they are not actual fear and love in the revealed state of the heart, but only in the intelligence of the brain and the recess of the heart, as mentioned above. So again, what did the sages say? The sages said that a good thought, Hashem joins to the action, not Hashem considers it as if you did it. A good thought, Hashem joins to the action, meaning the good thought is the motivation produced by the mind. Hashem joins that to the action, and that becomes the wings that raise the action, raise the mitzvah above. But God affects this joining of tevuna to action in order to elevate the performance of the commandments in the Torah study, which are carried out through the influence of the good thought, mentioned above, into the world of Beriah. Now we're getting technical. There's different levels of the different worlds of how high the mitzvot soar to. Again, this is Kabbalistic. We'll get to it later in the book in the later chapters. But for right now, it's just important. We're just clarifying that even if I do a mitzvah without any motivation, it's still going to be elevated to the world of Yetzirah, the second spiritual world, because I have hidden love to God, which we'll discuss later. When I create this meditation and create the intellectual emotion, what did he call it? I forgot what he called it. Not intellectual, the intellectual inspiration. Then it's elevated. Then God joins that intellectual motivation and combines it with the action. And now, instead of the mitzvah just being raised to the world of Yetzirah, the second world, it's raised to the world of Beriah, the third world, because that's the world of intelligence. So all this will be elaborated later. You don't have to worry about it too much right now. But God affects this joining of teshuvah. So this raises it to the world of Beriah. The world of Beriah bring the level to which ascends the performance of Torah and mitzvahs when motivated by fear and love, deriving from one's meditation and which are truly revealed in one's heart. In other words, the world of Beriah is the world of intelligence. And therefore, any mitzvah that is motivated by meditation is going to go up to Beriah. However, even without this joining, they rise to the world of Yetzirah by means, because Yetzirah is the world of emotion, by means of the natural fear and love within it, which are latent in the heart of all Jews from birth, as will be later explained at length. So this part will be elaborated upon later of exactly how high the mitzvot go. The bottom line takeaway here is very clear. There is a person, a Beinoni, who naturally will have negative desires, but he could control himself, not just in the moment by producing self-control, but he could motivate the self-control by producing fiery love to God in his heart through meditation. That's the first rule to the Beinoni. The main thing is you want to be in control of yourself. So you have the tool of self-control, but you need motivation for that. And the motivation is creating passion and love to God in prayer. So if you're in that level of Beinoni, good for you. It takes many years to develop that capacity. People try. That's why the Hasidim would pray for many, many hours and meditate, and it's wonderful. What happens if you're a person that cannot, even when you try, you cannot produce the passionate emotions like fire in your heart? Okay, we have the second rule for the Beinoni. Second rule for the Beinoni is you can create the intellectual motivation. It's not an intellectual idea which is abstract. Abstract ideas are not motivating, right? I want to be a billionaire. That's not going to get me do anything. It's too abstract. Then sometimes you have an intellectual idea which motivates. I say, this guy's my friend. We grew up together. You know what? I should go. You know, God forbid, I had a person, I'm not going to say names here, but I really, really was very close to him when I was young, till about 16, 17. Then I haven't seen him in 23 years. Then, unfortunately, his mother passed away. So, of course, I'm going to go to see him. Right? Do I feel a passion of love in my heart? No. But my mind tells me, this is, you know, you were close to him, you have to go. Right? That's the motivation of the mind. And we can create that same thing within our service of Hashem. We think about the greatness of Hashem, and we say it is worthy, it is appropriate for any creation to want to cleave to the infinite light of God, which is the source of everything, and the only thing that is significant, because everything else is insignificant in comparison to the greatness of God. You want more information about this? by the second half of the book. No, it's in the same book. But read the second chapter, the second section, which is the foundation of unity and belief, how everything is insignificant compared to the greatness of God. We read it in the past, in the summers. We'll do it again later. Don't worry about that. But that's the motivation. The motivation is I have an intellectual motivation and say, it is appropriate. What should I really want to do with my life? I should want to cleave to God, not all the other things that are insignificant compared to God. And everything else that I want should only be in the service of God. Now, how do I do this? I do this by the Torah and the mitzvot, because that's how you can lead to God. That's how you can hug God in this world. So this is the story in short. Again, confession. As a young boy learning Tanya, this was very powerful stuff. So that it. Here you have it. That's the story in short. Hope everyone has a wonderful Shabbos, and we'll